moment I set the folder down on the podium, the entire room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people paying attention. The other kind. The kind where 300 people collectively realize something is about to go very wrong, and they're not sure yet for whom. My father was still standing 6 feet away from me, his hand outstretched for the microphone I had just taken from him. He hadn't let go of his smile yet. It was still there, frozen on his face, because in 40 years of building his reputation in this city, no one had ever taken anything from him in public. I looked out at the room, the ballroom of the Fairmont in downtown Vancouver, the chandeliers throwing gold light across tables set with white linen, and the kind of floral arrangements that cost more than my first month's rent. I looked at the faces of the people my father had spent his entire adult life performing for, and I said, calmly, into the microphone, "Good evening, my name is Noelle Marchand, and I am Dr. Raymond Marchand's daughter, the one he just introduced to this room as someone who works with troubled youth, like a glorified babysitter." A few people laughed nervously. Most of them didn't. "I'd like to take just a few minutes of your time," I said, "because I think there are some things this room should know before you write your checks tonight." That was 8 months ago. But I want to tell you how we got there, because the end of a story only means something when you understand the beginning. I grew up in North Vancouver in a house that looked, from the outside, like the kind of place where a happy family lived. There was a garden my mother tended every spring. There were 2 cars in the driveway. There was a father who was a respected addiction medicine specialist who spoke at conferences and had his photograph in the hallways of St. Paul's Hospital, and who, at home, spoke to his daughters like we were minor inconveniences he was contractually obligated to house. My sister Evangeline got out early. She married at 23, moved to Calgary, and calls me every Sunday with the cheerful urgency of someone who escaped a burning building and is very glad to hear you got out too. I was the one who stayed too long. Not in Vancouver. I left for university in Halifax the week I turned 18, which felt like putting an ocean between me and something I couldn't name yet. But I stayed in the orbit. I called. I visited at Christmas. I told myself things would be different when I was an adult, when I had a career, when I had something he could respect. What I chose to do with my degree was the thing that ended it. I did my master's in social work at Dalhousie, specialized in youth addiction services, and came back to BC to work for a provincial organization that ran recovery housing for youth aged 16 to 24. We operated 4 houses in the Lower Mainland, provided transition support, ran group programming, connected kids to mental health services. I was a program coordinator and then, after 4 years, a regional director overseeing 2 of the houses and a team of 11 people. I was 31 years old, I was good at my job, and I had never once felt like I needed to apologize for it. My father felt differently. The first time he said something that registered as more than background noise was at a family dinner, maybe 2 years after I came back to Vancouver. I had been telling my mother about a kid in one of our houses, 16, had been couch surfing since he was 14, was 6 weeks clean, had just been accepted into a trades pre-apprenticeship program. I was proud. I was genuinely happy about this kid's future in a way I don't often talk about out loud. My father was cutting his steak. He didn't look up. "So you're a social worker," he said, in the tone of someone confirming an unfortunate diagnosis. "I am a regional director," I said, "of a housing and recovery organization." "Right." He set down his knife. "And you have a master's degree for this." "I do." He looked at me then, finally. "Noelle, I put you through university so you could manage a group home." I said something about the difference between a group home and a recovery housing organization. He said something about how it didn't matter what you called it. My mother started talking about what was for dessert. That was the beginning, the version of that conversation we would have in various forms for the next 3 years. At Christmas, he would mention, not quite casually enough, that a colleague's daughter had just made partner at a downtown firm. At Easter, he would ask, with what I think he believed was genuine curiosity, whether I had thought about going back to school for something more substantial. At my cousin's wedding, he introduced me to a table of his colleagues as, "My daughter, she works with teenagers," in a voice that somehow made it sound like I was one of them. I stopped going home as often. Then, about 18 months ago, I was appointed to the Provincial Advisory Council on Youth Mental Health Services. It's a government body. We advise the Ministry of Children and Family Development on funding allocations, program standards, and policy. I became, among other things, one of 5 voting members on a grants committee that reviewed applications from non-profit organizations across BC. The appointment was not public in any dramatic sense. It was listed on the government website. It was mentioned in my organization's newsletter. I didn't call my father to tell him because I had stopped telling my father things about my life. Somewhere around the 3rd year of being introduced to his friends as, "My daughter, she does social work or something," he didn't know. That detail matters. About a year ago, he called me, not to check in. My father does not call to check in. He called because the Raymond Marchand Foundation, a charitable organization he had incorporated 6 years prior, had submitted a grant application to the Ministry for funding to expand their community education program. The program, as far as I had been able to determine from the application file that landed on my desk, consisted primarily of a speaking series at private clubs and 3 annual galas at which my father gave remarks to rooms full of people who already agreed with him. The application was requesting $480,000 over 2 years. I was one of 5 people who would vote on it. He called because he wanted to have lunch. "It's been too long," he said, with the warmth of a man who has recently realized he may want something from you. "Your mother misses you." I said I'd been busy. Of course, of course. Listen, I'd love to catch up. Maybe Friday? There's a new place in Yaletown. We had lunch at a restaurant where the bread service alone cost what I paid for my first car. He was charming. He asked about my work in a way that almost sounded interested. He mentioned, almost in passing, the Foundation's grant application, said it was an exciting initiative, said he hopes the committee would see its value. I nodded. I ate my halibut. I said I couldn't discuss the process. Of course, he said, waving a hand. Just, it's a strong application. You'll see. What I saw when I went back to the file was an application with significant irregularities. Expenses listed for program materials that didn't align with any program description. A budget that allocated a substantial portion to what was described as administrative and facility costs for a foundation that operated out of my father's medical office. A previous grant from a municipal fund that, when I looked into it, had documentation gaps that flagged it for a referral. I brought the irregularities to the committee chair. She agreed they were significant. We referred the file to the appropriate people and declined the application. My father did not take this well. He found out about the decline first, before the referral had progressed far enough to reach him. He called me at 7 in the morning. "You did this," he said. He didn't say hello. I told him I couldn't discuss the committee's decisions. "Don't give me that. You killed this application. After everything I've done for you, Noel, this is what you do." I said I was sorry he felt that way. You should be. You should be embarrassed. You're sitting on some government committee handing out other people's money, and you use it to come after your own father. You know what then makes you? I didn't answer. "You're nothing," he said. "You've always been nothing. You played your little job managing your little houses, and you convinced yourself it was something real. It's not. You know what you are. You're a social worker. You're one step above the people you work with." I was standing in my kitchen, in my apartment in East Vancouver, holding my phone against my ear, looking at the espresso machine on my counter and the spider plant on the windowsill that I'd had for 6 years and kept forgetting to water. I had heard variations of this speech before. Something about hearing it at 7 in the morning without warning on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday made it land differently than it had before. "I've put years into this foundation," he said. "Years. And you throw a wrench in it because, what? Because you need to feel important? Because sitting on a committee makes you think you have power. You don't, Noelle. You never have. You're going to wake up one day in that little apartment of yours, still doing your little job, and realize that your whole life has been small. I said, I think we should stop talking now. Don't you dare hang up on me. I hung up. I stood there for a moment. Then I made my espresso. I watered the spider plant. I got dressed and went to work. I did not hear from him for 4 months. Then I got an invitation to the Raymond Marchand Foundation annual gala. At first I assumed it was a mistake, an administrative oversight, my name still on some list from years ago when I had attended as his daughter, back when things were different. But then my mother called, which she rarely does without a specific reason. Your father would like you to be there, she said carefully. I think he wants to try. I had heard this before too. The offer of a reset, usually when my father needed something to be different for reasons that served him rather than me. But my mother's voice had something in it I didn't often hear. She sounded tired in a way that was new. I'll think about it, I said. I went. I told myself I went for my mother. Partly, that was even true. The gala was at the Fairmont Ballroom. 300 guests. Black tie, silent auction, dinner service, remarks from various local figures who had lent their names to my father's foundation over the years. It was exactly the kind of event my father lived for, a room full of the right people looking at him, believing in him. I wore a dark green dress and arrived late, which I did on purpose, and found my seat at a table near the back that I suspected had been chosen for me specifically. Not visible enough to matter. Close enough that I could be pointed to if needed. My father took the stage after dinner. He spoke about the Foundation's work. He spoke about his vision for community health education. He spoke about the importance of family in the journey of recovery. And then, with the timing of a man who has rehearsed this moment, he gestured toward my table and said, My daughter Noelle is here tonight. She works with youth. Troubled youth. In the recovery sector. A small, fond smile, sort of like a glorified babysitter but for teenagers who've had a rough go. Light laughter from some tables. We're very proud of her, of course, in our own way. The laughter was the thing that did it, not his words. I had heard variations of his words for years. It was the laughter, the way it moved through that room like something comfortable and easy, 300 people finding it natural and untroubling that a father would stand at a microphone and diminish his daughter for a room full of strangers. I looked at my mother at the next table. She was looking at her hands. I stood up. I want to be honest about what I felt in the seconds between standing up and reaching the stage. I wasn't calm. My heart was doing something uncomfortable in my chest. My hands were not entirely steady. There was a voice somewhere in the back of my head that sounded like every version of myself that had ever stayed quiet, that said, This is not the place. This is not the time. You will regret this. Sit down. I didn't sit down. I walked to the front of the room. I put my hand on the microphone my father was still holding, and I want to be very precise here because people have asked. I didn't grab it. I didn't fight him for it. I just put my hand on it, firmly, and I looked at him, and after a moment, he let go. The room had gone completely silent. Good evening, I said. My name is Noelle Marchand, and I am Dr. Raymond Marchand's daughter, the one he just introduced to this room as someone who works with troubled youth, like a glorified babysitter. A few nervous laughs. I kept going. I want to clarify a few things for the record. I hold a Master of Social Work from Dalhousie University. I am currently the regional director of a provincial organization that runs recovery housing for youth in crisis in the Lower Mainland, a role I've held for 3 years. Last year, I was appointed to the Provincial Advisory Council on Youth Mental Health Services, where I serve on the committee that reviews grant applications from nonprofit organizations across British Columbia. The room had shifted. I could feel it. People were looking at each other. This foundation, I continued, submitted an application to that committee approximately 11 months ago requesting $480,000 in public funding for its programs. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. I wasn't able to support that application. Neither were my colleagues on the committee. There were concerns about the documentation, about how previous funds had been accounted for. The application was declined, and a referral was made to the appropriate provincial office. My father stepped toward me. His face had changed in a way I had never seen before, the polished surface of it cracking into something raw and furious underneath. "Noelle, I'm not finished," I said, quietly, into the microphone. He stopped. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said, which was only partially true. "I'm here because my father asked my mother to ask me to come, and I thought maybe he wanted to try. I thought maybe in a room full of his peers he might choose to be different." I looked at him. He was very still. He spent a long time telling me that my work isn't real, that the people I work with aren't worth the same kind of care and attention as the people in this room. He used the word glorified babysitter tonight, and some of you laughed, and I want you to sit with that for a minute. Because the kids I work with are 16, 17, 18 years old. They're sleeping in staircases and under bridges in this city. They have parents who gave up on them, or parents who had their own struggles and couldn't hold on. And the work of helping them is not small. It is not lesser. It is not something to be dismissed from a ballroom stage for a laugh. The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. I want to be clear that what I'm telling you tonight is a matter of public record. The Advisory Council's decisions are published. The referral is with the provincial office. This isn't a secret. It's just not something my father mentioned in his remarks. I set the folder I had brought with me on the podium. I had printed out the committee's decision letter, the referral summary, and the original grant application. I set them there because I wanted them to exist, physically, in that room, on that stage. "I'm going to leave now," I said. "I hope everyone has a lovely evening. And if you were planning to donate to this foundation tonight, I'd encourage you to do your research first. That's all." I picked up my clutch from where I'd set it at the edge of the stage. I walked back through the silent room. Someone near the door began to clap. I don't know who, I didn't look, and by the time I reached the exit, a handful of others had joined. My father called out my name once. I didn't stop. Outside, it was raining the way it rains in Vancouver in November. Steady and grey and without drama, just a fact of the world. I stood under the hotel awning and breathed in the cold air and texted my sister. "Just did a thing. Call you tomorrow." She called me in 4 minutes flat. "What thing?" she said. "Noelle, what thing did you do?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said finally. "Good. I don't want to tell this story like it had a neat ending, because it didn't, not in the way of movies, where everything resolves in one scene and everyone knows what it means. The referral is still under review by the provincial office. I don't know what will come of it. My father's foundation has gone quiet, which may mean something or may mean nothing. He hasn't contacted me. I haven't contacted him. My mother calls every Sunday now, which is new. We talk about her garden and what she's reading and my sister's kids. We don't talk about that night. There is something she's not saying that I can feel on the other end of the line, but I've learned not to push at things that aren't ready to be opened. I went back to work on the Monday after the gala. I had a check-in with one of my program coordinators, a budget meeting, and a conversation with a 17-year-old in our Burnaby house who was 7 weeks clean and working up the nerve to call his grandmother. I sat with him for 20 minutes. We talked about what he wanted to say and whether she would pick up and what it might mean if she did or didn't. She picked up. He came out of that call smiling in a way that used the whole top half of his face. I passed him in the hallway afterward, and he said, slightly embarrassed, "Thanks for, you know." And I said I did know, and I went back to my office and shut the door and sat for a moment with the feeling of that. My father once told me my life was going to be small. I've thought about that word a lot since then. Small. As if the measure of a life is how many people in a hotel ballroom know your name. As if work is only real if it requires a title that sounds impressive when you introduce yourself at a gala. I don't know what he was trying to build in that foundation of his. I don't know if he believed in it or if it was something else, another stage, another room, another version of the performance. I think, on some level, he never understood that the people I work with aren't the backdrop to someone else's story. They're the whole thing. They're what it's about. My sister calls on Sundays now, too, after my mother. We overlap sometimes, the three of us on a group call that would have been unthinkable a year ago. My sister in Calgary and my mother in North Van, and me in my apartment in East Van, with my somewhat recovered spider plant on the windowsill. The night of the gala, standing under that awning in the rain, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not exactly. More like the particular quiet that comes when you've stopped waiting for someone to finally see you and realized you stopped needing them to. There's a certain kind of power in knowing, before anyone else in the room does, exactly what you've built while they weren't paying attention. By the time they look up, the work is already done.